Thank you very much. Really delighted to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Skip. I would like to thank James Skip Rutherford and Nikolai Di Pipa for being so kind and generous in arranging this talk. And I would like to share with you some thoughts, and I prepare some remarks that are brief, but I think are pertinent, and I hope you find them well thought. And first, to start with the idea of learning how to be an ambassador is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my lifetime. In fact, some ways, the transition from my positions in the Mexican cabinet to that of ambassador were more difficult than my transition from businessman to director of national intelligence. American writer Ambrose Bierce once defined an ambassador as, I quote, a person who, having failed to secure an office from the people, is given one by the administration in condition that he leaves the country. Well, I did. I had never been properly a politician, so that was not quite my problem. But for many years, I was responsible for shaping policy. So it was difficult as a transition for me because ambassadors are not policymakers. We don't make decisions either. We are just facilitators. Our job is to facilitate that dialogue and to build up conversations. Our job is to engage with the country in which we are stationed at a deeper level on behalf of our government. So why was the transition so hard for me? Well, frankly, because for me, there is hardly a more exhilarating enterprise than designing and implementing policy. This is my natural. I know most of you here are or will be policy enthusiasts, and so I feel more at home with you as an audience. Unlike some of you, I never anticipated that my career would be entwined with government when I was a young law student. In fact, I started my professional life aspiring to become a businessman. At the time, my ambitions were clear. I wanted to become an independent, experienced, successful businessman. Somehow, however, I kept managing to get involved in public affairs. In the early 90s, for example, I represented the private sector as a lawyer in the NAFTA negotiations. Negotiations like NAFTA are complex, not just because of the many different interests involved, but because a large-scale transformation and change often scare people. We found those kind of conversations here as well as in Mexico. Moreover, NAFTA was ultimately about the long-term interest of our three countries. And long-term interests often have difficulty competing with the immediate interest of the short term. It takes not only people with vision, but people with an ability to articulate that vision in a way that allows others to see it as well, giving them hope for what the future can become. And yes, I am thinking of a certain man from Arkansas for whom the School of Public Service here is named. President Clinton was indeed one of the several such visionaries in our three countries who were able to see beyond the interest and politics of the moment to something greater. With all the political noise that surrounds NAFTA still this day, it can be difficult to think about it clearly, but the key facts are here and we can see them. 20 years after the implementation of the agreement, trade between NAFTA countries has more than tripled. US trade with Mexico was $508 billion last year. At least 6.5 million jobs in the United States depend on how much Mexico buys from this country, how much the US exports to Mexico. The integrated supply and production chains that NAFTA brought about make our region more competitive in the global economy. Actually, one of the most, if not the most competitive area in the world. Several years after my work on the NAFTA negotiation team, my career in the private sector took a sharp turn in a different direction. President Fox, I don't know out of what, and his then Interior Minister had been advised to hire someone with analytical strengths and management skills from outside the intelligence community to head Mexico's National Intelligence Agency. I was soon very much surprised to find myself appointed to President Fox's cabinet as the head of national intelligence. And after a few initial doubts, I must say I think I did a pretty good job. In many ways, managing in government is no different from managing a business. There are resources to deploy, personnel to supervise, and structures to organize. Management skills are of paramount importance in public service, and nowhere is that more true than in Mexico today, particularly in security matters. In the same way that small businesses must sometimes battle stiff competition from established competitors, police forces are often tasked with confronting criminal organizations with more capital and greater numbers. In both cases, managerial decisions about how to best deploy resources in order to gain a tactical advantage are everything. Similarly, without good management, all the resources in the world will ultimately not lead to success in any endeavor. The same thing is true in our bilateral relationship. Our region has been blessed with an abundance of resources, but it is up to us to ensure we take advantage of them. I would say that the bilateral goals of Mexico and the United States are clear. The construction of a 21st century regional manufacturing platform that develops the potential of our nations to become the most prosperous region in the world in the next 2 decades. We have the elements to achieve this: geography, resources, and people. Now we need to shape the policy to go with it. I am often asked whether I think US foreign policy pays enough attention to Mexico. My answer is that we don't really need foreign policy attention from the US because we have such a vibrant, dynamic, and intense bilateral relationship that we cannot really frame our relationship in a foreign policy context. Foreign policy almost seems like the wrong word given the degree to which our economies and our peoples are bound together. Our bilateral relationship must continue to develop policies which recognize that our interconnectedness make us stronger. In developing these policies, we would be foolish not to take advantage of those who can play special roles in regional integration due to their natural skill set. Many of you have seen recent stories announcing that California now has a Hispanic majority in terms of population. Most of these Hispanics are Mexican in origin or heritage, and are in many cases bilingual, binational, and bicultural, born in the era of globalization and internet, a NAFTA generation. What's more, their thinking is not burdened by the same old stereotypes that have long prevented our two countries from becoming closer. In fact, my children are very much a part of this generation. My son, Nicolas, just graduated from college, Yale University, and now works as a reporter for BuzzFeed. in New York. He is every bit as comfortable writing and speaking in English as in Spanish. I could say the same for my other two children, Tomás and Camila. In some ways, they personify a new phase of the bilateral relationship that brings us to an important question. How should we respond to this development in a productive way that pays dividends for our region and our people? The question goes to you, policymakers. As I previously mentioned, I'm no longer one of you. I am really regretting that. But I do have a few general suggestions. The way to respond to North America's position in the global economy is to take advantage of the regional integration that makes us competitive. The way to respond to the unique characteristics of our human capital is through policies that unlock its potential rather than restricting it. The way to respond is to invest in new generations of capable leaders at places like the Clinton School for Public Service. In short, the way to respond through policies that build bridges rather than walls. And I trust that you, future policymakers out there, will be up to this task. Thank you very much for the great opportunity of addressing you today. Thank you.
All right, we do have time for questions, so if you'd raise your hand and then we'll get the microphone to you. I have a question right here.
Thank you for coming. Could you say something about the oil stabilization fund, the wealth fund, and how that's been helpful and used in Mexico to help the Mexican people?
Well, this is a new decision. This is not yet established. We are transforming Mexico in very fundamental ways. Let me go a step backwards. Mexico politically is a very complex country. You have 3 different political parties. It is really impossible from political arithmetics to build up a majority in Congress from one single party. We have not had a majority in Congress since 1987. So the only way to get change, transformation, decisions actually processed through Congress is through a combination, which should be normal in politics, but it's not, leadership on the one hand and compromise on the other hand. And leadership as something which, of course, embodies a president who is very much committed to do that, to change and transform Mexico, but also recognizing that his leadership cannot be so without the leadership of those who head the 3 major political parties in the country. So it's a shared leadership. And from that shared leadership, building a shared vision and then be able to compromise. You get what you want, but you give the other political players what they want, and then you find a middle ground in which you can actually move forward. And we have done a tremendous advancement here. We had constitutional amendments for education, removing the union from actually managing the curricula and the career of teachers with a wrong incentive framework. We did labor reform with more flexibility and mobility. We did financial reform, incentivizing banks to actually make their money from lending money to business people, not investing their assets in government-issued bonds. We did antitrust reform and telecommunications reforms, quite critical in a country in which markets are very much taken, and we need to remove barriers of entrance so the little guys can actually have a chance in a much more level playing field. And we did energy reform, the mother of all reforms. And I say this because essentially we have identified the Mexican national identity with the idea of having a state-owned oil company. And the real definition of sovereignty is not to have a national state-owned company for anything. It is really your ability from policy making and politics to improve the standards of living of your own citizenship in a sustained basis in time. And this is what makes a country sovereign. So we changed now energy. And we have opened the sector from a constitutional amendment to allow private investment from domestic sources and foreign sources to enter the energy sector. And this reform is not privatizing Pemex, but it's allowing Pemex to enter into partnership with other entities, Mexican and foreign, and also will open the field for the government to grant licenses for domestic and foreign companies to actually exploit the resources. And from there, the national rent that comes from exploitation of these resources, we were blessed, as the US has been blessed, with a fantastic resource base, but we were not really using that. And our total output really declined. We came from 3.5 million barrels a day to 2.5 million barrels a day. And if we were to keep on that trend, we will be a net importer of oil sometime in the next 10 years. And that's kind of awkward because we are sitting there with the resources. So we had to change that. We formed this fund that will actually take a huge proportion of this revenue. Instead of actually paying for ordinary budget, it will go to this sovereign fund that will be invested essentially in productive projects within Mexico, including education, which is, I would say, the most important endeavor. This is yet to become a reality. We are now, today, the President is presenting before Congress the project for the secondary legislation on the energy reform, and this is a part of it, but it's already considered within the constitutional amendment.
Any other questions? Yes, right here.
Thank you, Ambassador. You mentioned education. Here in the United States, we are now discussing how to improve education at the high school level. But the two presidents, Mexican and American, have talked about 100,000 university students exchange in the near future. Can you address that in terms of how will that improve both economies, both relationships?
The name of the game is education, which is in terms of how we shape the ability to create value, either in manufacturing or services or any other economic activity. It is a skill-based approach. And skills are essentially linked with education. And this is why we had to pursue this major reform in Mexico. And it's really very difficult to explain. The US has 835,000 foreign students in college and graduate schools. From Mexico, less than 14,000. We are 117 million people just south of the border. No other country has a so close relationship with the US than Mexico in every single aspect that you can imagine. It's even worse with Americans going down to Mexico. We had 4,200 in 2012. We have less than 4,000 this year. It's, nonsensical. And if we have been able to actually trade as much as we do, and actually produce together, let me just give you one piece of information, which is critical here, to understand how intertwined our economies are. Mexico is the second largest customer of the US. We buy more goods from the US than the BRICS combined, than China and Japan combined, almost as much as Europe. Only Canada is a larger customer to the US. But we will surpass Canada just because of demographics. This is not a black box. But of course, Americans buy a lot of Chinese products. We Mexicans do as well. Everyone does. This is only. But when Americans buy a product manufactured in China, the American value added into those products is 4%. When you buy a product from Canada is 25%, because Canada has been very much integrated with the US for a number of years. But if you buy a product from Mexico, it's 40%, so 4 to 40. When Mexico exports manufactured goods to third countries, Brazil, Peru, Spain, France, Germany, Japan, the American value added into those products is 38%. We have been able to actually combine our manufacturing value-added chain in a very effective way. We are the 4th largest exporter of automobiles in Mexico, in the world. But there's no such a thing as a Mexican car. And there's no such a thing as an American car. It's really part systems and components that go back and forth the border at least 8 times before a consumer can see something as a car they can buy. And this is no accident. This is really a very effectively integrated value-added chain in automotive parts and aerospace and electronic. This has been possible from the trade pact, but without a political approach, we don't have a strategic vision on each other and the region, and without public policy. Imagine what we could do together if we can really take a few layers up our skill-based human capital. We need the best universities in the world are here. So why are we sending our kids elsewhere? Why are you not sending more kids to Mexico? And this is the project. There are 2 different projects, the 100,000 strong project of President Obama, which is really focused to get 100,000 people from Latin America to the US, and the bilateral initiative, which is 100,000 Mexican students in the US per year, from 14,000 today to 100,000. Regardless if it is college or graduate student or just a language course or just a training course for a certain skill or a semester in interchange, whatever, and to have 50,000 American kids into Mexico. This will change the conversation. In the US, essentially we feel that we are portrayed from stereotype and preconception. But I have to tell you that in Mexico, we portray Americans exactly the same fashion, with the stereotypes and preconception, and we need to go over that. And the other way to do that is actually to have more people-to-people contact. And when Americans go to Mexico, they change their mindset. I mean, they see a much more complex, interesting, fascinating country. But exactly the same happens to Mexicans when they come here. And we have to work in a systematic way to make this possible and to change the conversation among ourselves and on ourselves together towards the future.
Any other questions? Yes. No, that's okay. We'll get here.
Excuse me. Your Excellency, quick question about the relationship between Mexico and China and how that affects the relationship between Mexico and the United States.
Well, this is one of my favorite questions. I am fascinated with China in many, everyone is. It's impossible not to. First of all, Mexico has a relatively small trade with China. We import a lot of Chinese products, essentially components that then we embody into essentially the electronic industry, and then we manufacture goods. But China has not really invested much in Mexico, as they have done so in other Latin American countries like Brazil or Peru or Chile, because they are investing in countries from where they can get commodities, which they need to feed their economy. But when I see the future, and of course China will grow more than any other country in the next 20 years, that's a given, just because they are 1.36 billion people, and they are going to develop their domestic market. And now you see commodity prices, corn, soybeans, I mean, you name it, copper, iron ore, are way up just because China is starting to consume. And China has advanced dramatically. They have more speed rail than the rest of the world combined. And they will have more robots than any other country in the world. Within 5 years, they will surpass Germany. And in 10 years, they will have more robots than the rest of the world combined. And this is just amazing. But when you see China, then then you analyze that in a more careful way, you find a puzzle. First of all, China's growth is not coming from consumption. In a country like the US, total, if you see GDP, 70% is consumption, domestic consumption. 60 to 70%, that's the standard. In China, that's 35%. So growth really comes from public expenditure, capital expenditure from the government. And they have built up infrastructure which is not actually used, and they have built malls which remain empty because they have not been able to actually get their people into consumption. They will. That's a given. I'm not doubting that. But they have other puzzles, which, as compared with North America, will look better in many ways. If we are smart enough to really grasp our opportunity and build up a strategic vision towards the future. But median age in the US is 37. In Europe is 41. Other countries, Japan is 46, and last year, amazingly, in Japan, more people died than were born. In Germany, median age is 45. In Mexico, median age is 27, exactly the same median age as Hispanics in the US, 27 years. In Japan, median age is 34, so just below the US. But fertility rates, Mexico is not a major source of migrants into the US now. It's actually been a negative number from 2010 to this date. Not only because we are performing better in terms of economic development and job creation, but because our fertility rate dropped dramatically from 7.3 children per woman in 1960 to 2.2 today, just above the US, which is 2, just below 2 now. China's fertility rate is 1.5. Distribution of newborns by gender. Mother Nature has established a pattern which is for mammals, not only human beings, 106 boys per 100 girls. And this is just because boys survive better pregnancy than girls, and then boys have a higher mortality rate in the first few years of life, and then things are leveled off. In China, the distribution of newborns in terms of gender is 114 boys per 100 girls. So this is biased. So if you project demographically China from today to 2050, from 1.36 billion people, you will get to 857 million. And as a Chinese economist puts it, Chinese people will get old before they get rich, and the country will shrink. And yes, sure, the next 20 years, 25 years, they will grow that no one else. But after that, the US demographic profile, the North American demographic profile, the balance between geography, resources, and demographics looks much better. And of course, other elements here, innovation, creativity, labor mobility, the rule of law, which is something that, of course, we are building in Mexico. And this is something that really shapes North America in a very different fashion. So China as a relationship is critical for everyone. We should understand and get very close to China. I think that China will have opportunities of investment in Mexico, but Mexico will remain, North America will remain as a manufacturing base. I am positive that we can compete. We can compete today in cost, in total cost to market. We can compete successfully with China and as a region, and we will so in the future. So in this sense, I only see opportunities, and we have to understand China and take the opportunities that China puts before us.
Professor Ernst?
Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Little Rock and welcome to the Clinton School. I wonder if you'd just share with us, from your own perspective, you've already done so a little bit, but the 3 or 4 things, the important things that you would like for each of our citizens, our collective citizens, to know about each other that would advance sort of this important relationship that you've so well described.
The issue is, first of all, that we are human beings, that we are very much alike, that we share values and perspectives of life, and the interpretation of the world is very similar. It's Western, it's Occidental in the more broader and philosophical sense, that we actually integrate very well. We have the largest American community abroad in Mexico, over 1 million blue passport holders live in Mexico today and growing. And when you go and see these people, I mean, not only people that have retired in Mexico, but people that have integrated themselves into industry and manufacturing and services and banking, they love it there. I mean, they really integrate themselves and they feel quite comfortable. And when you see, this is what that really surprises me more about the US is, the US is essentially a country that has built up its greatness from the ability to embrace immigration. This is not the melting pot. I hate that expression because the melting pot conceptually sees people that as really getting the same pattern, exactly the same approach to life, and you don't. You actually can keep your own approach to life in your own national heritage or identity, but you integrate very well into the society. And the society is much welcoming, and this is the social fabric of the US, precisely that. And this is why this country is so innovative and so creative. From day one, this is a country of immigrants. Today in the world, we have just above 7 billion people, more or less. It's amazing when you see immigration, because when you see the total number of people living in a country different than the one they were born, it's only 215 million people. We all think that it should be much higher than that. It's relatively small. 40 million live in the US. 11.5 million of Mexican origin. But you have 30 million from other countries living here. And this country is very much enriched by that. And the balance, as I said, in terms of geography, resources, demographics, shapes the US much better than any other OECD country in terms of demographic dynamics. And from there, I think that if we would understand each other better, just to see the facts and try to figure them out, and to see and understand why is that we trade that much? Why is that we have this intense border that has more than 1 million crossings a day legally, that has 375 cars, trucks and railroad cars crossing that border legally on a daily basis? No other border in the world has this intensity. There is no accident here. As I said, our relationship is not really within the foreign policy category. The most important members of the cabinet in Washington for us are commerce and homeland security, not state, because those are the positions that take our...
I've got a question. Mattia, you got a question? You had your hand up?
Bienvenidos a Arkansas y gracias por venir. My name is Mattia Fleischner and I'm a first-year Clinton student. And I was interested in asking, you spoke quite a bit about the increase in population of Latinos and Hispanics in the United States, which is more than 30% now. And the increasing Mexican Americans such as your son and interest in building relationships between Latin America and the States. And my question to you is, what would you like to see young people like myself and your son and others in the States do to expand relationships and expand human capital between Latin America and the States in the future?
Of course, the Latino population in the U.S. is 54 million. This is 16% of total U.S. population. Mexican origin is 34 million. It's 11% of total U.S. population. And of course, the Latino population will grow more than others just because the median age is lower. This is just an arithmetic equation. But I think that what really fascinates me is that when I came as an ambassador here, I was very much committed, I am very much committed to help the Mexican community here and try to provide for them whatever they need to assure that their dignity, opportunities, and certainty are met. And immigration reform is part of that. Immigration reform is a U.S. domestic issue. We don't mess with that, but we certainly convey the facts to members of Congress. But what really fascinates me is that the more I get to know the Latino community here, regardless of our national origin, not only the Mexican Americans, and this is one of the beauties. First, the Latino community in the U.S. is not national origin based. It doesn't matter if you're Dominican, Cuban, Salvadorian, Mexican, or it doesn't matter. You actually get together with others and identify with others easily because we belong together. And when I say, I go and deal a lot with National Council of La Raza and Aleo and many other organizations, and when I tell Janet Murguia, the president of the National Council of La Raza, she was born in Kansas, her parents came from Michoacan in Mexico. Fascinating human being, really. I say, Janet, we have nothing to teach you. We have everything to learn from you. So how can we get what this Latino community has achieved and get that to Mexico as a message? We have less Mexican-born nationals here today than we did in 2007. And this is important as a message for me. This is a learning experience. In 2007, we had almost 1 million more Mexican-born nationals here than we have today. They went back. Some of them on their own will. The economic crisis helped. And I would say a huge percentage of them went back with a little help from ICE. When they go back to the communities, they behave totally different. Most of them do have a certain command of the English language, but their attitude is different. They are not seeking government subsidies. They are entrepreneurs. Most of them own their own businesses. And they engage with their communities much better than their sisters and brothers that remained back home. And when I see the US and I go and visit the communities of migrants from Mexico or El Salvador, and you see the best of the US is really embodied in these people. So this is a cross-fertilization process. Fantastic. Can we systematize this cross-fertilization process? Can we actually make something out of this and learn from each other in terms of values, attitudes? Can we actually build up a better future for our region, for our people together? I think we can. We have only to be smart enough to envision a strategic vision on each other and the region. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Can we take one more question? I got one question to ask you.
One or more?
One more.
I'm
going to piggyback her question about what, as Mattia said about young people. Move that question to Arkansas. And I know there's been a lot of involvement in Arkansas. For example, your friend and mine, Matt McClarty, has been very involved and has been very strong in promoting U.S. And Latin American ties, all over Latin America and all over South America, but particularly in Mexico, where he has made major investments. What advice do you have to the Arkansas business community? What advice do you have to people that are interested in in making their mark in development in Mexico? Any tips, any advice?
I do. I have two names that I would like to refer to you as resources, both in Arkansas. One is Walmart, the other one is Tyson Foods. Walmart is the largest private employer in Mexico. 250,000 people in Mexico are employed by Walmart. And Walmart, if you see the Walmex stock is listed separately than the Walmart. It is within the whole, but around a fifth of total Walmart sales come from Walmex or Walmart Mexico. And these guys open almost 300 new stores every single year. It's a growth conversation. And what they would tell you, Tyson, and Tyson also is present in Mexico. The first time I came to Little Rock 19 years ago was to visit Tyson because I was in the poultry business. Go there, see with your own eyes, talk to the people, go away from what you read in the media and experience as a tourist, as a student, as a visitor, as a business person, and you will get fascinated, as we are when we come here. This is the best piece of advice. Visit Mexico, as I do give the same piece of advice to our Mexican friends in Mexico. Come to the US, see by yourselves. This is, I mean, we get along very well, and this is no accident. We do share the same values. We do share the same perspective of life. And we are actually pretty good in doing and building things together.
Let's thank the ambassador for an excellent presentation.